A portion was turning black, down by the jittering lump that was her right foot. Feeling like a man in a dream, I shook free of Moore's hand and stepped to the night table. There was a glass of water there, surrounded by 3 or 4 bottles of pills which had fallen over during the shake. I picked up the water and dumped it on the place that was smoking. There was a hiss. John Coffey went on kissing her in that deep and intimate way, inhaling and inhaling, one hand still held out, the other on the bed, propping up his immense weight. The fingers were splayed, the hand looked to me like a brown starfish. Suddenly, her back arched. One of her own hands flailed out in the air, the fingers clenching and unclenching in a series of spasms. Her feet drummed against the bed. Then something screamed. Again, that's not just me, the other men heard it, as well. To Brutal it sounded like a wolf or coyote with its leg caught in a trap. To me it sounded like an eagle, the way you'd sometimes hear them on still mornings back then, cruising down through the misty cuts with their wings stiffly spread. Outside, the wind gusted hard enough to give the house a second shake, and that was strange, you know, because until then there had been no wind to speak of at all. John Coffey pulled away from her, and I saw that her face had smoothed out. The right side of her mouth no longer drooped. Her eyes had regained their normal shape, and she looked 10 years younger. He regarded her raptly for a moment or two, and then he began to cough. He turned his head so as not to cough in her face, lost his balance, which wasn't hard. Big as he was, he'd been sitting with his butt halfway off the side of the bed to start with, and went down onto the floor. There was enough of him to give the house a third shake. He landed on his knees and hung his head over, coughing like a man in the last stages of TB. I thought, now the bugs. He's going to cough them out, and what a lot there'll be this time. But he didn't. He only went on coughing in deep retching barks, hardly finding time between fits to snatch in the next breath of air. His dark, chocolatey skin was graying out. Alarmed, Brutal went to him, dropped to one knee beside him, and put an arm across his broad, spasming back. As if Brutal's moving had broken a spell, Moores went to his wife's bed and sat where Coffey had sat. He hardly seemed to register the coughing, choking giant's presence at all. Although Coffee was kneeling at his very feet, Moores had eyes only for his wife, who was gazing at him with amazement. Looking at her was like looking at a dirty mirror which has been wiped clean. "John!" Brutal shouted. "Sick it up. Sick it up like you done before." John went on barking those choked coughs. His eyes were wet, not with tears but with strain. Spit flew from his mouth in a fine spray, but nothing else came out. Brutal whammed him on the back a couple of times, then looked around at me. "He's choking. Whatever he sucked out of her, he's choking on it." I started forward. Before I got 2 steps, John Nee walked away from me and into the corner of the room, still coughing harshly and dragging for each breath. He laid his forehead against the wallpaper, wild red roses overspreading a garden wall, and made a gruesome deep hacking sound, as if he were trying to vomit up the lining of his own throat. "That'll bring the bugs if anything can," I remember thinking, but there was no sign of them. All the same, his coughing fit seemed to ease a little. "I'm all right, boss," he said, still leaning with his forehead against the wild roses. His eyes remained closed. I'm not sure how he knew I was there, but he clearly did. "Honest I am. See to the lady." I looked at him doubtfully, then turned to the bed. Hal was stroking Mellie's brow, and I saw an amazing thing above it. Some of her hair, not very much, but some, had gone back to black. "What's happened?" she asked him. As I watched, color began to blush into her cheeks. It was as if she had stolen a couple of roses right out of the wallpaper. "How did I get here?" "We were going to the hospital up in Indianola, weren't we?" "A doctor was going to shoot X-rays into my head and take pictures of my brain." "SHH, Hal said,